The spread of power and evil had long been restrained by certain limits, but as thought and institutions evolved, those limits eroded, and the reach of darkness deepened and widened. In the age of emperors, Confucian thought had already been reshaped and weaponized, allowing rulers to extend their dominion into the hidden chambers of the human mind. Yet in later ages, a new and more terrible fusion arose: the cold logic of natural variation, survival of the fittest, and the devouring of the weak joined hands with the creed of materialism. And upon this foundation was built the systematized theology of Marx and Lenin, a machinery of ideology so complete that tyrants could raise their personal will to the status of divine law. No longer were people merely restrained by ritual and decree. They began to participate in power's dominion willingly, eagerly, even zealously. The chains that once bound them from without grew from within, forged in the furnace of conviction and ideology. The Soviet Union never truly fulfilled the doctrine of Lenin. Only China did, and it did so in a strengthened and perfected form. Through this system, the dictator forged a nation of absolute submission. Society itself was remade in the image of obedience, every thought measured by loyalty, every motion aligned to the center, every breath drawn beneath the shadow of the leader. Thus, the will of one man became the law of all, and the spirit of an entire people was gathered beneath the banner of power, the red seal of the beast upon their foreheads. To understand why Marxism-Leninism could exert such overwhelming power in China, we must trace its intellectual origins. In 1815, Russia, Austria, and Prussia formed the Holy Alliance, suppressing the tide of bourgeois revolutions and imposing severe restrictions upon the Jews. Jews were stripped of civil rights and confined to designated remote areas. Marx's family, a lineage of rabbis, found themselves trapped by these persecutions. In 1817, Heinrich Marx, Karl Marx's father, converted to Lutheran Christianity to escape the constraints of his Jewish identity. The choice of Lutheranism was not difficult to comprehend. As Jews dispersed from the Middle East and intermarried with local populations, their original bloodline had been diluted beyond recognition. Lutheranism, emerging from Martin Luther's Reformation, opposed the authority of the Roman Church and proclaimed that the believer is the priest, meaning that any individual could commune directly with God and receive divine instruction without mediation. This emphasis on personal freedom and rejection of centralized ecclesiastical authority posed no psychological barrier to the Marx family, who had converted. The young Karl Marx was baptized, yet this experience planted a seed of rebellion in his heart. Faith was no longer an eternal, immutable truth, but a choice subject to the pressures of reality. In adulthood, Marx became a utilitarian atheist, yet he never forgot the ultimate Jewish teaching of a kingdom on earth. Poverty, exile, and revolt drove him to settle in London, where he wrote Capital. Though his work had limited impact during his lifetime, after his death it was revered by Eastern European Jews and eventually spread across the world, ultimately reaching China. Essentially, Karl Marx was the founder of a modern religion. He borrowed portions of the Christian framework, pieced together various worldly theories, and then invented his own system. He adapted the philosophy of Christian love, transforming its unity of opposites into the dialectical materialist unity of opposites. His theory of labor division was plagiarized from Adam Smith. He appropriated the scholastic notions of labor value and just price, distorting them into what he called Marxist economics. Moreover, Marx's revolutionary theory amounted to a secularization of Jesus' solidarity with the common people and revolutionary spirit. His system drew heavily on the structure of Christian theology, using it to make his ideas more incendiary and deceptive. Although Marx's theory borrowed theological structure, its interior was hollow. Within the framework of Marxism there was no love, no transcendence, no spirit of Christ who walked out into the world. It was a framework empty of substance, devoid of call, soulless. Consequently, Marx's materialist view of history, inevitably degraded into a form of utter historical nihilism. He was a heretic, the leader of a cult, led by the spirit of lies, taking parts of the gospel to invent his own doctrine. The Bible vividly depicts this, coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs, Revelation 16:13. An impure spirit proceeds from false prophets to deceive the nations. When such doctrines are treated as historical laws, explaining everything, and excuses are made to avoid correction in the face of counterexamples, the risk of dogmatism arises. Then a new age begins. Revelation 8:10-11 says, "The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water, because it had been made bitter. When a system of thought that seems bright, blazing with passion, such as the ideals of communism, descends with fire and hope, when a false kingdom on earth is exalted in place of true worship of God, it is like wormwood falling into the waters, poisoning the source of all society. People drink, believing they gain life, yet the result is tens of millions of unnatural deaths and immense suffering throughout the land." Marx's hostility toward capital did not arise in a vacuum, but was the product of his personal circumstances intertwined with his intellectual background. Born into a Jewish family, he lived in a Europe where Jews had long been marginalized and restricted, forced since the Middle Ages to work primarily in finance and trade, and thus regarded by Christian society as the very embodiment of capital. This conflicted identity caused Marx profound anguish. On the Jewish question, he even portrayed money as the secular god of Judaism, keenly discerning the power of capital while simultaneously fostering deep self-loathing. Throughout his life, Marx endured poverty and repeated setbacks, relying heavily on Engels for support. These personal hardships inclined him to view capitalism as the chief architect of injustice and alienation, imbuing his theory that capital exploits labor with intense emotional force. His thought was further shaped by philosophical and religious traditions. From Hegel, he inherited the dialectic of historical necessity, seeing capitalism as a stage destined for demise, and from Judaism he absorbed the vision of an earthly kingdom, transmuted into a secular utopia of proletarian liberation. This synthesis gave his critique of capital a fervent, almost religious passion that transcended mere economic analysis. Yet Marx's understanding of capital was limited. He saw it as dead labor ruling over living labor, inevitably producing alienation and exploitation, while neglecting its potential for creativity, risk distribution, and social mobility, rendering capital almost entirely demonized in his worldview. Originally, these outpourings of emotion should not have carried any real influence, yet in Volume of I, Chapter 32% of Capital, Marx launches into a vision of communism. He imagined that when capitalism reached its final stage, society would become enormously wealthy, material abundance would overflow, and production would be so advanced that every need of the people could be met. At that point, private ownership of means of production, for example, factories, mines, would no longer be necessary, replaced instead by what he called common leadership. In this vision, the class of capitalists would vanish, and with it, exploitation. Everyone could do as they pleased, and life would be supremely good. Marx's description of communism is strikingly brief. He never explains how this collective ownership is to be realized. Is it merely government ownership masquerading as public possession? If enterprises are held by a single dictatorial government, can their property truly be called common leadership? In later generations, enterprises, controlled by authoritarian states, leveraging monopolistic power, extracted extraordinary profits. These concrete realities, how communism would operate in practice, are entirely absent from Marx's original vision. Marx's communist kingdom on earth is fundamentally opposed to Christian theology in its logic. Christianity teaches that redemption comes solely through the grace of God, for humanity is powerless to save itself due to original sin. Marxism, by contrast, places liberation in the hands of the proletariat through revolutionary praxis, transforming salvation into a doctrine of self-redemption. Marx's communism offers a secularized earthly kingdom, replacing the Messiah with the proletariat. Christianity emphasizes the universality of sin, declaring that all must repent, whereas Marx reduces sin to class oppression and designates the proletariat as an innocent elect. In essence, the Christian kingdom of God is both transcendent and eschatological, fully realized only at Christ's return, yet partially present in the lives of believers through the Spirit. Marx's communism, however, envisions a historically imminent utopia that can be constructed in the here and now. Christianity holds a cautious, even pessimistic, view of human nature, recognizing that no institution can eradicate sin, only mitigate it. Marx assumes that once classes are abolished, human nature will naturally improve. Ultimately, Christian eschatology depicts God personally intervening in history to judge and redeem, while Marxist eschatology portrays humanity deifying and recreating itself. In this sense, Marx's kingdom on earth is a secularized substitute for religion. It displaces God, enthrones history in his place, elevates the proletariat as the new elect, and manufactures a false salvation through utopian promise. The kingdom on earth drew upon Plato's Republic and inherited its ideas regarding population control. In the Republic, there is a principle of managing the population and treating lowly lives as expendable, as if they were garbage. In other words, some lives are valuable, while others are ignoble. This concept is consistent with Darwin's notion of survival of the fittest. If humanity were to evolve through natural selection, it could advance toward a perfect utopian society, yet in such a scenario, evolution would be slowed by those with inferior genetic traits. Only by removing those who hinder progress could the evolutionary equation accelerate. The ultimate goal of a utopian society of noble bloodlines would be achieved through the elimination of inferior peoples. Recall that the full title of On the Origin of Species is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. It is thus conceivable how a Chinese government adhering to such an ideology would treat the lower classes. In later chapters, we will see again and again how Chinese dictators deliberately caused massive deaths among both the military and the populace. It is thus conceivable how a Chinese government adhering to such an ideology would treat the lower classes. The danger of certain gospels or heretical doctrines lies in the fact that they exploit the framework of faith and thought while stripping away the original core values and spiritual essence. Marxism is a prime example. It appropriates the structure, logic, and eschatological concepts of Christianity, yet removes God, love, and internal moral restraint, secularizing salvation and placing it in the hands of humanity itself, through historical classes and struggle, to accomplish. On the surface, such a system retains the form of faith through promises of utopia or messianic rhetoric of class liberation, but at its heart, it is hollow, a theory devoid of moral constraint. When this empty theory is treated as a law of history or scientific truth-guiding practice, it gains immense dogmatic and institutional power, able to rapidly penetrate society through political authority, control minds, and create both institutional and psychological chains. Marx's theory exploits humanity's natural desire for fairness and justice, reducing complex issues to binary oppositions, oppressors and oppressed, thereby intensifying social conflict. Though it appears as idealism or salvation, In reality, it legitimizes extreme power and centralization, rationalizing political violence, economic monopolies, and ideological surveillance. Stripped of love, divinity, and individual conscience, people are reduced to instruments and utilitarians, easily manipulated by power. Partial truths or partial gospels, through institutionalized education, propaganda, and organization, can be rapidly replicated across cultures and nations, producing long-lasting and profound social effects. Thus, the danger of such gospels lies not in their falsity, but in the fact that they preserve only form, extract motivation, and confer absolute legitimacy upon political and social practice. Such doctrines are highly susceptible to heresy and institutionalization, ensnaring society in a framework of false justice and producing persistent psychological oppression, political centralization, and economic exploitation.